Everybody, thank you so much for inviting me here to talk about Giving Tuesday. Thank you to Farah. I know it was all your idea. I love talking about Giving Tuesday. I'm not going to talk a ton about Giving Tuesday. What I'm going to do is give you, let's get off the picture of me, a broad overview of sort of what sparked the movement and the creation of the movement, what led us to begin it in the first place, and the sort of growth that we've seen over the past 3 years, and now what we're expecting going into the fourth year. And then I just want to leave plenty of time for any questions that you might have. People always have very specific questions and challenges and opportunities related to their specific organizations and roles, and those answers are really very different based on the individual organizations. So broad sort of or genesis story of Giving Tuesday. The 92nd Street Y, where I work, is a 140-year-old Jewish community and cultural institution. For most of that time, we have served a very local community in all sorts of ways. We have a lecture program, we have a nursery school, we have a senior program and jewelry classes, and all more things than you could even imagine. And a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, my boss, who was our executive director, Henry Timms, and I began talking about and thinking about how you interpret the mission of a 140-year-old organization in an innovative way. How do you innovate on a 140-year-old mission? And we were lucky because our mission statement is all about building community, fostering dialogue, fostering civic participation and engagement, providing space for safe and civil discussion, nurturing the whole person, cradle to grave. But it didn't actually say anything about that only happening on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And so we took that as license to start thinking about how to fulfill that mission in a really global sense. And that really gives us such an incredibly broad field on which to play and which to think about creating movements like Giving Tuesday. So just to set that framework, that Giving Tuesday is one of many things we work on at the 92nd Street Y that is about engaging and serving global community. When we started thinking about, this movement specifically, we were looking at Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and we were thinking about how good those days are for the retail sector. They're really very, very lucrative. And wouldn't it be great if there was a day that was as good for the nonprofit sector, and that was really a spur to the nonprofit sector to be creative and to be innovative and all of that good stuff. And we were also thinking a lot at the time about social media, which is a really broad thing to be thinking about, and of course everybody's always thinking about social media. But we had started a conference called the Social Good Summit, which some of you might have heard of. We do it in partnership with Mashable and the UN Foundation. And that's an annual conference around the UN General Assembly that really talks about bringing together technological solutions to address big global challenges. And one of the many things we learned through scaling that summit, it now takes place in 110 countries a year, is that people want to talk about positive things on social media. They don't just want to share what they ate for breakfast or how many miles they just ran. They really do want to talk about things that matter. And so how could we translate that in a philanthropic sense? And so Giving Tuesday was also an experiment to say, is there even an appetite for people to talk about philanthropy and giving on social media in a more intentional and meaningful way, and potentially, maybe, one that actually drives dollars as well? And the answer to that, happily, has been absolutely. So in that first year, we launched 60 days before the first Giving Tuesday. We talked about waiting a full year, right, so that we could put together a strategy and a business proposal and all that good stuff. And I'm so glad we didn't, because part of the reason that Giving Tuesday has turned into this massive and amazing learning experiment is that we did it in a really lean way. We just got out there and got the product to market, as they say, and have been learning from it ever since. So with that 60 days, our first success metric was, could we get 100 nonprofits to join up with us and say that they would be part of the movement? No legal contracts, no logo requirements, no branding, nothing like that. Open source, completely inclusive, cause agnostic, platform agnostic. So by that first Giving Tuesday, we had 2,500 partners, and we saw giving go up 50% over the previous year, which was like the baseline year, the day after Cyber Monday. And the next year, giving went up another 90% on that day. This is all online giving, which is really all you can measure day by day. And the following year, which was this past year, the third year, it went up another 63%. So we've been really happy with those numbers, but they're far from the only numbers we look at when we're determining whether we feel good about where the movement is going. And that's great. We want to see nonprofits raising money and those funds being used to benefit the constituencies of those nonprofits. But it's definitely not the only thing we look at. So we're really also looking at the conversation and how robust it is. So these numbers on the bottom are really around what Giving Tuesday was like in terms of conversation on social media. We had billions of impressions and a huge amount of hashtag use and a huge amount of creativity in that conversation. We created a meme to go along with Giving Tuesday, which was called the Unselfie. And we saw that being used a lot too, and organizations doing really interesting things with the Unselfie. So one of my favorite examples that I always give is the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which did an Unselfie campaign around pictures of, so telling their donors to post pictures of the person that they are fundraising or donating on behalf of, right? In other words, who that they know that they love or loved was suffering from Parkinson's and is the reason that they donate to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Super powerful, highly visual, very emotional, great storytelling campaign. Definitely one of my favorite examples. So this is the number of impressions, 15.4 billion, a 180% year-over-year growth on social media just since the year before that, which was the second year. So just in terms of throwing up a few different examples of the different levels of engagement, it was really important to us to not only have the endorsement of sort of the big guns, but on the other hand, we really couldn't have done it without that. So people like the president and the Gateses and so forth were in right from the beginning with really vocal endorsements of Giving Tuesday. And the fact is, you just can't downplay the importance of that kind of amplification. When we looked at the social media behavior the very first year, one tweet from Bill Gates was like the grand peak, like the Mount Everest of our social media engagement that first year. So that was absolutely wonderful. This was one of the most meaningful parts to me last year, was having Malala come in and make that statement. And Yo-Yo Ma, particularly as a cultural organization, an arts organization, we felt very good about that. No Giving Tuesday is complete without Hugh Jackman. And Justin Timberlake, and the names just went on and on and on and on. But again, the really meaningful ones to me were the people who were not philanthropists and not even donors, who were entering that space for the very first time, right? And feeling invited to be part of that conversation for the first time. And that made me realize that as a sector, we've not done that very well, right? We haven't said, like, you're invited to be part of this giving world, and you don't have to be Bill Gates to be part of it. You don't have to be a billionaire to be a philanthropist. It's like no one had ever articulated that before, and once that framework was out there, hordes of people just kept rushing into that conversation, and that was what was really, really meaningful to see. So we created Giving Tuesday to really be owned by the community that makes it up. And so one example of that was that we were trying the first year really desperately to get Michael Bloomberg's endorsement and for him to proclaim it a day. And we tried really hard, and finally we got word that it was going to happen. And then a few hours before it did happen, we got word that the mayor of Batesville, Arkansas, had proclaimed it first. So we didn't even get our first New York proclamation, but we actually loved that story. They hadn't communicated with us. They didn't need our permission to do it. They went ahead and did it, and they got a lot of press for it. And one of the first tools we put up was a guide to pitching yourself to local morning shows. So say you're a nonprofit owner in some small town, you're trying to get attention for your Giving Tuesday campaign. This is exactly how you go about that. This is how you write a press release. This is how you pitch yourself. And we had one young kid, this kid must have been 19, 20 years old, who was on like all of his local morning shows in some small town in Oregon. And again, we were really, really thrilled to see that. So again, spirit of movement, totally open source, totally inclusive. We have never had cause to clamp down on what anybody is doing for Giving Tuesday. And in fact, we really encourage people to take it and make it their own as much as possible. Just an example of some of the media. that we saw around it last year. Some of the this was some celebrity engagement and so forth, really giving people a reason to speak to their cause and be part of this sort of zeitgeist of energy and emotion and storytelling and all of that good stuff. So these are a couple of specific examples of really good Giving Tuesday campaigns. And when I say a good Giving Tuesday campaign, I don't mean that there's some clear definition of what a good Giving Tuesday campaign is. There's not. Different things work for different organizations, and following someone else's playbook to the letter does not guarantee a successful return in terms of a Giving Tuesday campaign. When I say a good Giving Tuesday campaign, I mean they really know their own community. They clearly had the leadership impetus and permission and encouragement to be creative, and they really took risks, right? Whether that means they made it their own name, like Giving Blue Day, whether it means they they decided to tie it in with their end of year campaign knowing that might not work, whether it means that they tried to be innovative in some brand new way and played with their own branding in a way that could potentially backfire on them, or whether it means they risked making their board angry, right? Because it's taking part in a movement that some people at that level are just not sure of yet. So specifically, these are some of my favorite examples. This one is last year. So Giving Blue Day was the University of Michigan's Giving Tuesday campaign. Great campaign considering universities have never been a big player in Giving Tuesday. We've seen some do Giving Tuesday campaigns and have luck with it. Mostly it's their development departments or alumni engagement departments reaching out to their own constituencies. They do some modest fundraising. It's great. But Giving Blue Day was a whole big, ambitious online campaign. They set a $1 million goal. They renamed it Giving Blue Day. They set a $1 million goal, and they made $3.5 million on Giving Tuesday. The equivalent breakout story the year before was the Methodist Church, which had like a $100K match and made over $6 million. Right, for all of their global constituencies. Unbelievable. So every year there's one that we just don't expect that breaks out. But the great thing about them is they serve as a beacon for other people in that community. So we'll see a whole lot more universities engaging because they saw this kind of success, just like we saw a whole lot more churches and synagogues and all, et cetera, engaging once they saw the Methodist success. This is the Hispanic Institute of Philanthropy, and they are, or Hispanics in Philanthropy, and they are creating a huge Giving Tuesday campaign this year. We have very high hopes for it, again, being super creative. Giving Zoo Day, or my PR director earlier today said, you just love talking about Giving Zoo Day. So talking to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I mentioned it like yet again, but I think it's the cutest thing. Like, look at that logo. That is a great logo. It doesn't always have to rhyme, by the way. It doesn't have to be Giving Blue Day or Giving Zoo Day. But Giving Zoo Day is a great example for another reason. It's an example of collaboration. And so many of the Giving Tuesday campaigns we've seen that work really well because people reach out of their silos and they reach out of that sort of prevalent nonprofit attitude of every dollar that similar organization makes is a dollar we can't make. We have to dispense with that attitude and instead realize that there's a big pool of donors, there's a big pool of people who've never given, that we're just giving ourselves permission not to even reach out to those people. But once we do, we realize there's actually enough money, right, to lift all boats. So what Giving Zoo Day is one zoo, the Brevard Zoo in Florida, I believe, getting together the entire network of zoos across the country to do a campaign that is focused on community awareness about the importance of zoos in our community, the importance of them to our children, the importance of them in wildlife conservation, that sort of thing, right? That's a good Giving Tuesday campaign because it has a really powerful narrative and it has a whole lot of people working together and not worrying about whether they're going to be stealing money from one another. We saw a similar one last year, the Allentown arts organizations coming together to do a Giving Tuesday campaign. So this was 6 arts and culture organizations in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who had never worked together before, who absolutely had that sort of like, are they going to give to them? Are they going to give to us? And this was their first effort at really coming together in collaboration to raise awareness about the importance of arts and culture organizations to a community, and they all did very, very well out of it. And this is a curriculum that we had created for us by the Nightingale Bamford School, which is an amazing curriculum for kids to really learn about philanthropy in depth instead of just as, a kind of one-off. I mean, my own kids, generally their only exposure to philanthropy is when they do a penny drive or something like that at school, or after there's a big disaster. So the point of this is to actually integrate it into the curriculum. And this year we're really building on it by working with schools to implement a philanthropic initiative that kids do starting in September and culminating on Giving Tuesday. So our focus is really on making sure that people understand that we don't see Giving Tuesday as like the one day you should be thinking about giving. It's a day we all come together to celebrate giving, but it's something that we think about year round. These are our local campaigns. So one of the most surprising and best things that has come out of the movement in the last few years are these campaigns. We didn't plan these, we didn't cultivate them. They are cities, states, counties that come together to create a community-wide Giving Tuesday initiative that brings together like small businesses and local nonprofits. So a local pizza joint might give $1 for every slice sold to the local animal shelter, right? And the local governments get involved, the mayors, endorse and come out, and they have events, and it's like the philanthropic sort of 21st century equivalent of the county fair. Really, really nice sort of patriotic story, and again, a real sort of example of collaboration. These are just some of our global partners. So the fact that we predicated Giving Tuesday on Black Friday and Cyber Monday meant that we had no expectation of it exceeding the boundaries of the United States, but it has, and it was present in 68 countries last year, and will be, almost in 80 countries this year. Some are actual organized efforts that are sanctioned by us, and we work very closely with the leaders, and some are just grassroots movements that have appeared, and we literally learn about them like on Google Alert, which is great. We love it. So just some basic, these are sort of like, the very, very general tips, but I would be happy to answer more specific questions about what works, what doesn't, if you're sort of wondering about those kinds of specific things, or have any questions that are specific to the organizations you work for.
I had some questions I prepared. Anybody didn't have anything, but one of them was, I heard last year Giving Tuesday was in December, right?
It's always in December. Well, depends on the fall.
Right.
Depends on when Thanksgiving falls. Right.
And so I know a lot of organizations do like a December match campaign. Mm-hmm. And so when it wasn't in December one year, and then just in general, there's a fear that, Giving Tuesday is going to take away from the year-end campaign. Or like if somebody gives on Giving Tuesday, they'll see that as their year-end donation, and maybe they only gave $20, but like usually they give
$10,000.
Yeah, exactly, $10,000, and so you can't ask them for another gift. They just gave on Giving Tuesday.
Right.
I guess, how do you get around that?
Well, the data is really helpful. So, you can always feel better when you actually have numbers to back up a statement. So the available data just shows that it's just not the case, that the dollars really do appear to be additive, that when people are giving on Giving Tuesday, when organizations do good Giving Tuesday campaigns, they tend to make more throughout all of December. So I think the key there is really to not look at Giving Tuesday as a one-off and then you run your end-of-year campaign, but instead look at it as the kickoff to your end-of-year campaign. And it fell in November the very first year, and then it was on December 3rd, 2nd, and now 1st. But it shouldn't matter, right? If Giving Tuesday is the kickoff, it's always going to be at the end of November. There's always going to be around a month to fundraise until end of year. And we really intended it to be the kickoff to the giving season. So really capitalizing on feelings of goodwill around Thanksgiving. We're really thinking about what Thanksgiving is, the link between gratitude and giving back, right? You feel thankful, but then there's a second part of that, right? You feel thankful, you feel gratitude, and what do you do as a result of that? You don't just stuff yourself with turkey, right? You actually make life better for other people or animals or the planet or whatever it is that you happen to care about. But that has been a concern since the very, very beginning. We don't hear from our partner organizations that it happens, that it does cannibalize those end-of-year gifts. That said, I would say it never hurts to be explicit with donors, right? That we're not looking for a replacement for your end-of-year gift here. Like we are so grateful for the support you show us, right? And now we have this extra matching opportunity on Giving Tuesday or whatever it is. A match always is one of the Giving Tuesday best practices. People who do very well with Giving Tuesday often have a match, not always. Sometimes it's a different component, different strength. But yeah, that's what I would say. I'm happy to wrap up early if anybody has any questions.
But I didn't want to.
Specific thing, their organization, special access.
Have your organizations participated in Giving Tuesday before? Anybody?
Do you have a question back there?
Yeah, I'm curious about Giving Zoo Day. So there's all the zoos are promoting Giving Zoo Day together. I'm wondering, do you know how they actually manage the funds afterwards? Like how they split it?
Yes, so important clarification. It's a good question. The money is not coming into a central portal. People will still donate to the individual organizations. They'll still donate to whatever their local zoo is. I think the campaign is really betting on the fact that they're doing it as a coalition, making a lot more noise, right? So that you're going to hear about it as a national campaign, as a national storytelling initiative in a way that you wouldn't if it was, you might if it was the Bronx Zoo, right? But you probably wouldn't if it was like a local county zoo somewhere, right? In some small town. So I think that it's like, you know, that we are sort of more than the sum of our parts type of thing, but the funding is not going into a central pot. That would get complicated.
Do you have anything on Giving Tuesday website and it's like search by zip code, so you can, if that's what you've heard, you can go there to find things on the.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've done with Giving Tuesday is to create a really massive educational infrastructure. We started doing it a little bit really kind of low rent ad hoc the first year. Like we would get interesting people together and have Google Hangouts, and we'd have them on different topics like digital strategy or end of year campaign or whatever. And people liked them, but they also at that stage found Google Hangouts to be really cumbersome or difficult. The tech wasn't always good. And so over the years, we've classed that up a little bit. We have video series now. We have nonstop webinars that we do mostly in conjunction with different partners. So we don't even have a webinar platform basically, but we work with Blackbaud and Network for Good and the Junior League and all sorts of organizations, to Salsa Labs and whatever, to host different webinars that are of interest to different constituencies, and all of those are free and archived. And then almost any toolkit you could imagine that we have felt would be of service is on the Giving Tuesday site and available for download. And then one feature we added this year, which is really interesting, is the Giving Tuesday Community, which is the back end of the site. So if you sign up as a partner, you actually are part of this this community that looks and feels a lot like Facebook, but it's discrete to the Giving Tuesday partners. And what I like about it is that we are not part of it. In other words, like we're not positioning ourselves as the central portal for all Giving Tuesday information and tools. People communicate with each other. So what you'll see in the community is just the same way you could start a Facebook group, people starting Giving Tuesday communities like Hungry and Homeless is one. And it's just a coalition of organizations that serve those needs coming together to share Giving Tuesday tips, what worked, what didn't, best practices, mistakes, lessons learned. There's the animal welfare community is amazing at working together and in conjunction with each other. And we saw that actually on a global scale as well. Like when some of the global partners would first be launching, we would see things like, one community maybe in Singapore tweet to a community that was about to launch in, wherever, Ireland or Israel, right? Can we help? Call us up. People doing things like sharing their entire code so that people could more easily build their own Giving Tuesday website with all those tools and not have as much cost associated and not have as much human and capital resources. So, yeah.
We've done Giving Tuesday in the past.
What's your organization?
The URJ. Can you just clarify the difference between being an official partner versus being an organization that goes out and participates?
Just does something? There's not that much of a difference. In fact, right now we are, this is really amazing. It's totally unprecedented from past years. We're getting 300 organizations signing up a day on the Giving Tuesday website. And it's funny because I made a bad call. It doesn't matter, but my prediction this year was that people would realize that they didn't really need to sign up as a Giving Tuesday partner. Like, you can. Like, go out, do whatever you want. It's a movement, right? Success to us is when it's moving by itself. What you get when you're a Giving Tuesday partner, though, is that you are part of that community. So there's a lot of that shared knowledge that goes on, and you get all of our stuff. We proactively send out like this. You might want to think about doing this at this stage, right? So helpful tips about what you might want to be doing at each particular stage of your end of year planning, and things like office hours with different types of experts. Like, you guys are all here in New York, but think about nonprofits who are around the country who don't have access to the kinds of minds, consultancies, digital wizards. They don't have a purpose to come to and gather in groups like this. And so those kinds of things are really incredibly helpful and meaningful. So for us, it's great when people sign up, because we like to have, it's very useful for us to have a snapshot of who's participating in Giving Tuesday. But I think there are thousands of organizations who are not signed up on our site. And that's fine. That's fine.
Can you talk about the second to last bullet there? It says post your blog on our website.
Yeah, so the blog is a great feature of our website. We really are very, very bullish about trying to amplify the work of our partners. So one way we can incentivize nonprofits to be as creative as possible is to say, look, if you have a really good story to tell, we're gonna ask you to write about it, and then we're gonna share it out for you, and we're gonna use you as a case study and a best practice, right? And that's really good PR for any nonprofit. So if you have a story to tell and you think you're planning a good campaign, share it with us. We will amplify it. You write the blog, you submit it, and we just make sure it's all kosher, and then we publish it. And certain stories just rise to the top every year, and those are the ones I find myself telling over and over again. And they're always the ones that I would say, it's the last one, show some sense of not only creativity but an ambition, right? Like really taking some entrepreneurial risks with Giving Tuesday, but also fun and humor and positivity, right? So this is one example I use all the time: the Badass Brooklyn Animal Rescue, which is this tiny, completely volunteer-run animal rescue whose mission is to rescue dogs from high-kill shelters. Their Giving Tuesday campaign, their entire campaign, was centered around a trip that they took to Georgia to rescue 11 Giving Tuesday dogs from a high-kill shelter and bring them back here to New York to be adopted. And they Instagrammed the whole trip. They live tweeted the whole trip. It was all done in such a spirit of like fun and positivity. Like, here's the change we can make. Sometimes I'm on the treadmill and I have the TV that's right there, and there's like the ads with the dying puppies and it's so awful and gut-wrenching. And it doesn't make me want to donate. It just makes me want to run off the treadmill and not look at that commercial anymore. They really flipped that messaging. They really used it in a way that was and they exceeded the money that they wanted to make. And we're talking like $18,000 or something, but they exceeded what their goal was. So if you have stories like that and you want to write about that and you want other people to benefit from your learnings, then that's what that's about.
Yes. I would say Horizon, and I just wanted to get your advice about engaging internally, actually. We actually have sites throughout the 5 boroughs, and we wanted to see how we could make everyone on the sites kind of engage our Giving Tuesday campaign. So what are kind of some initiatives you would...
How many sites do you have?
57.
57. Wow. And what would a win look like for you? I mean, that's the first thing to decide, is what success would look like for you on a Giving Tuesday campaign. Do you want to raise money? Do you want to raise awareness? Do you want to openly and publicly serve a certain...
Yeah, so...
all those things?
If you don't know St. Horizon, we're the largest victim services agency in the country. Yeah. Okay, great. And mainly, we do a lot. So we help victims of domestic violence, human trafficking, homeless youth. So we really want to raise money. I think that's number one. But we also want to kind of raise awareness and build more of a sense of community make sure people know that we're here if you need our help.
Yes.
And it's a struggle just because we do so much and we're located everywhere.
Right. Do you have a big social presence?
I wouldn't say it's like so engaging. I mean, we want to certainly build that up.
Yeah.
It just comes with doing so many things. It's kind of hard. The messaging is kind of lost
Right.
sometimes. Yeah.
Right. So I would have to give it some thought, and the way that we would usually do this is to set up a call and really talk about all of the different things that could happen. But some general ideas that would spring to mind are engaging a partner who could provide a match for you. Whether that's, and not only about the money, right? It's about the amplification. So if you had either an individual, like an amplifier, an influencer, someone like the First Lady springs to mind, right? This is a big policy priority right now for this administration, is domestic violence. Like, what do you have to lose by asking if she might be your spokesperson for Giving Tuesday, right? Or looking up so Avon did a big domestic violence push a couple years ago for Giving Tuesday. Is there anyone like that? Is there anyone like that who could potentially partner with you to just really be able to amplify your voice? And then is there any sort of volunteer or awareness raising activity that could happen at the sites on the day that would draw attention in, I don't want to say a joyful, but in a unifying way, right? And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that would be my first instinct. So there's an example that's popping to mind, not that we're talking about the same issue, but last year there were a group of Jewish organizations in New Jersey that came together to serve the hungry and homeless in their communities, and they did it by having a massive challah bake. Right? So they had 200 volunteers baking over 800 loaves of challah. Right? That was a really nice way of drawing attention to a really serious and ugly issue. Right? So giving that kind of thought to what that could look like. Also, I will say that the instigator of the Giving Tuesday campaign in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who also happened to be my college roommate, runs a women's shelter. And she might be a really interesting person to talk to about how she used it to build awareness for her shelter, which is called A Woman's Place. And I'd be happy to connect you with her. I'm sure she would love to talk about what she learned and what she did that worked.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to her.
Great. Yeah.
Based on the success of Giving Tuesday, do you think that would translate to other giving days throughout the year being successful as well, or do you think this is just associated with that time of year?
I think it kind of has yet to be determined, right? I mean, giving days are really popular right now. There's a lot of giving days, and I feel like the conversations I have with the people who are running them, nobody knows quite where all this is going to land. We don't know where it's all going to land, and they don't know either. From our perspective, right? And I get asked this all the time if we consider them competition and whatnot, and absolutely not. Like, for us, the more giving, the merrier, right? It's all about catalyzing giving. So if local communities can have giving days that work for those communities and raise lots of money, that's fantastic. At the same time, if they feel like they are going to, they kind of like want to be part of this global feeling of people all doing stuff around giving together, then we would love them to join the Giving Tuesday movement, still maintaining their own identity. In fact, I literally just came right straight from here from having coffee with a guy, I won't tell you what community foundation he runs, but he runs a very large community foundation that has its own giving day in the beginning of November that raises $5 to $7 million a year. And we were having the meeting and he was saying, we're going to fold into Giving Tuesday next year. And the reason was that, which is the reason I've said to people in the past, if your community, it feels really good, right, for a community to come together around giving. Giving and philanthropy are a major metric of civic participation and engagement. So when you have a community that is giving together, you have a healthier community, period. Like, there are many other measures, but it's a really important one. But it also feels good to know that your community is coming together and giving, and so are dozens of other communities around the United States and the world, right? That's a really nice feeling. And that's, when we think about building a global day of giving, that's the ultimate ambition, is a day where we all sort of stop and know that a lot of people around the world, probably not everybody, is thinking about the same thing, and that it happens to not be shopping, it happens to be giving. That would be really, really great. So it's a convoluted answer. We want people to do whatever works best for them. But when people come to us and say, could we still maintain our own identity and be part of the Giving Tuesday umbrella, the answer is absolutely yes. You're not losing anything by doing it. Hi.
Hi, I'm also from Safe-Rising, but my question is more generally just about Giving Tuesday. So maybe you've spoken to this before we got here, but it seems like a lot of the conversation in general about philanthropy, and especially about Giving Tuesday, is having organizations asking people to give them money. A lot of it asking individuals to give money. Is there any kind of movement on having companies or employers, the flip side of not asking for money, but asking to give money, and engaging companies in that way?
So to clarify for me what you mean. So having companies...
The onus oftentimes is on the small nonprofits that we all work for
Yes.
to ask for money.
Yes.
And that's kind of what this is about, but it's making it fun and easier.
Right.
And kind of having people come together.
Is there a movement?
Side would be engaging employers to
100%.
volunteer to give
Yes.
without being asked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have businesses of all sizes engaged in Giving Tuesday. So the rule is, basically the only rule we have, right? Like, don't do anything evil with Giving Tuesday. And then the other rule is, be a 501c3. And if you're not a 501c3, then be a corporation or a small business that is raising money for a 501c3. So we thought that we might see, somebody doing something really evil with Giving Tuesday because we couldn't really stop them, but we haven't seen that at all. What we see is businesses coming in with, so Microsoft is an example. They do a $250,000 match for Youth Spark. They do a whole employee engagement campaign around that. They make their match every year, like an hour into it. It's so successful and so popular. Many other stores, Home Depot and Target, JCPenney, engage in their own ways and for their own causes. Most corporations have a nonprofit or a cause, at least several nonprofits that they're raising money for. And that's really important. Engaging companies with that much money, with that much capital, is really important in driving funds on that day. And that's actually one of the reasons I suggested, if there is a business you can draw into your ecosystem, it's really powerful in that way. It really doubles down on what you're able to do as even a large nonprofit. All the large nonprofits have corporate partners. So yes, that is a big part of it. And I think also what we're seeing a lot more businesses do is things like launching employee giving campaigns on that day, right? So things like payroll deduction schemes and so forth that are going to lead to monthly giving or sustained giving, but that they launch then. But certainly we're big fans of seeing the businesses put their money where their mouth is as well.
Do you have any special things coming up in 2015 for national media? Any things you can let us in on? Any secret, exciting activities?
So not that I can let you in on, but yes, we do have very, very amazing things in store for media for Giving Tuesday for this year. I think this year is going to be really spectacular. One thing that we can't offer media outlets is exclusivity. So that makes those conversations pretty interesting because with a philanthropic movement, say like Red Nose Day, there's a lot more that they're able to give to a media partner. But our strategy this year is really, first of all, helping local communities engage their local media. So the media is not about us. And then the philanthropic media is already doing plenty of Giving Tuesday coverage. I'm seeing far more than in previous years. The Chronicle has run a lot of things on it and so forth. But I do think that we will see a lot more mainstream media coverage this year. That's all I can say. And that might not happen, who knows? All right, thank you. It was really nice to talk to all of you. Do you have another questions?
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, so what have been some of the failures you've seen, or some of the challenges in the past years? So I know it's easy to talk about successes, but I think sometimes for some of us we've not done so great at giving.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the challenges and pitfalls you've seen?
It's so interesting because I actually encourage people to tell me those stories. I feel like we don't hear nearly enough of them. Like, people want to give us the positive feedback, but in that way that people have, they don't necessarily want to give us the negative feedback. And I'm sorry for that because I actually can't learn what's not working and help to remedy that without those really in-depth specifics. So with that caveat, a couple things, spring to mind. One is holding fast to the us versus them mentality. So a woman from an organization in Illinois, and the only reason I heard this story is because I know her. She was at my college reunion. She was saying, we just didn't have any luck with Giving Tuesday. We just didn't raise enough. She works for a direct service organization, and there are several other same kind of direct service organizations in her area. They all had their own Giving Tuesday campaigns. They all, we all raised little bits of money, but everybody was kind of groaning about it afterwards. And I just didn't, I just kind of wondered why they didn't all come together and do a much bigger, more collaborative Giving Tuesday campaign. Another one is if you don't really have the buy-in of your senior leadership. So Giving Tuesday has often been the province, and especially in its early years, it was often more junior people who were like really advocating for it from within the organization. And that's great if that person actually has the license to try. But if they don't, and there's really a lot, somebody putting the brakes on it from up above, you're going to be a little stifled, right? Because if it's all about creativity and innovation and trying things you haven't tried before, that's going to be really hard unless you actually have the mandate and the permission and the encouragement to do it. So you need a team. Like Giving Tuesday needs a team, and that doesn't mean that you need a huge staff. I don't even have a huge staff. I literally don't have one single full-time Giving Tuesday employee, not one. I work on a million other projects, and so does everybody who works for me. But you do need a team in the sense that you need multiple stakeholders engaged and enthusiastic. So you need at least one board representative, right? Really willing to pull for this. You need a person on your executive leadership team, right? You need somebody from the constituency you serve, really encouraging it to happen. Like that makes up a good, passionate Giving Tuesday team, and that's going to kind of be the real anchor. And then I'll also say that we have heard some like, oh, we did Giving Tuesday and we didn't raise that much money. But then when we probe a little bit more into what was done, it was like, and they sent out an email, the morning of Giving Tuesday saying, it's Giving Tuesday, donate to us. And there was no strategic thinking behind it. There was no follow-up. There was no actual sort of narrative arc to their Giving Tuesday campaign. There was just an email and then sort of an expectation that like money would flow in like a fire hydrant. And Giving Tuesday definitely does not work like that. And then the last thing I'll say is that use Giving Tuesday, the best Giving Tuesday campaigns use the movement as an opportunity to cultivate new donors and then build those relationships, right? If you cultivate the new donors and then just ignore them, that is just such an incredibly wasted opportunity. Donors are valuable, whether they give $10 million or $10, and you never know when somebody who gives $10 is going to be able someday to give $10 million, right? So really building on Giving Tuesday with what we call Thank You Wednesday and beyond, right? Saying like, you are really important to us. You have supported really important work and we're going to keep in touch with you. People want that. Donors want that. So not letting your campaign end with the day itself and thinking beyond just fundraising. And then, there are actually organizations, I was just reading about one earlier today, who stay away from fundraising entirely for Giving Tuesday. I think it was a food bank in Alameda County, it was in Oakland, California, that just did a campaign to say to all of its donors to say, thank you for being a supporter. We don't want any money from you this Giving Tuesday. We just want to reach out and say how grateful we are for your support. And when organizations do that, and we've seen that before actually too, they make money. People want to give them money because they like being thanked and they like being appreciated. So it's a really, really smart strategy.
The majority of our audience is still paper. So last year, one of the areas that we struggled with is we're a large organization with different types of constituencies. And so for the components of the organization that serve audiences that are younger and online and or particularly like one of our camps that didn't have an end of year campaign,
right?
This actually became essentially their end of year campaign. But for annual campaign, that's really much. When I say older demographic, I'm talking 70 plus. So I'm curious to know, a friend of mine last year I got a hard copy card in the mail leading up to Giving Tuesday. That was like a thank you note. One of the things we thought about doing this year, basically our earlier conversation, is doing a paper component in advance of the digital component to help drive some of the audience that's on paper online. I'm just curious to know if any other organizations have done something like that, if you've heard stories.
I'm sure they have. I'm sure massive amounts have done stuff like that. And I think it's probably very successful. I can't dredge up a particular example from my head right now. But paper communication, as we all know, is still a really important part of fundraising and donor retention. It just is. And it's a great opportunity to put together really compelling materials. So I think having a strategy that's a mix of on paper and online is really important. I mean, from our perspective, the only downside of non-online gifts, and that's something different than what you're talking about, is just that it's so hard to measure. So we don't have a sense of how successful it is because we can't measure offline gifts. But I think you program for your own, you create a campaign for your own constituency. Knowing who your community is and what they respond to is the first step in creating a good campaign. I mean, like you, the 92nd Street Y does not cater to mostly millennials, right? We definitely have a very senior audience, and there's no way we could communicate with them only online. No way. And we know exactly what kind of stories they need to hear and so forth, and then the component of them that we can communicate with in that way. And I bet Farah would have amazing strategies in mind for how to mix media in that way.
7:30. So
Yeah, I should go home to my kids.
Let you run.
So yes, thank you.
Everybody for coming, and you can stick around, chat with each other, chat with